It looks as if the panel is now complete, so let's begin the panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to have a chance to have again international as well as an interdisciplinary panel to address one of the key issues that actually has faced Europe since its inception, European economic challenges and collective solutions. So I'd like to say a few words of introduction very briefly, in particular about some of the speakers you have not yet had a chance to meet. First of all, to my left, we luckily did have the chance to meet Ms. Kristiina Ojuland, a member of the European Parliament, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Estonia, for her excellent keynote address yesterday. We also were privileged this morning to get to know Dr. Furfari and Dr. Jelen, who gave also two excellent lectures this morning, so I won't say an additional introduction for you both. We also had the chance yesterday to get to know Sebastien Wielemans, a Belgian film director, who also gave us a wonderful presentation, also a multimedia presentation regarding some of his work in terms of film as cultural diplomacy. So European cultural diplomacy as well as beyond. So we all are grateful for that. One person we have not yet had a chance to meet is a good friend and partner of mine who I got to know in Berlin, Willem Noé, currently an economist for the European Commission and the DG Enlargement. We got to know each other in Berlin actually when he was there at the European Commission and kindly would host us at the European Commission for events. One of our favorite speakers also amongst the young leaders. And it's great to have you back. In particular, this is your topic, so I think in that sense it'll be wonderful to have your perspectives as well as your insights. As we did yesterday, I'd like to have this panel as interactive as possible, so I will limit my role as chairman and moderator to one question. The idea is really just to get the ball rolling. This will give a chance for each of the speakers maybe to make an opening statement. And right after that, I would like to give it the floor to you to ask the questions and make the comments that you see as most relevant for you. So give you more of a driver's seat with the panel. And I'd ask the panelists also to keep your remarks brief, just to allow more of an interchange between actually the audience and also the panel. So let's take a look at this topic once again, European economic challenges and collective solutions. Maybe to begin, since we have such a diverse panel, I'd like to ask the question, if you could pinpoint one challenge facing the European Union right now in terms of economics, so one economic challenge, what would the single most important challenge be right now, today, that you see for the European Union? And then maybe secondly, you could respond to this maybe in the same breath, if you had a magic wand and could actually change one thing about the European Union that might help to rectify that challenge, what would it be? And again, assume it's a magic wand, so you don't necessarily have to say what you predict or what may come in the next few years, but if you had the power to change one thing or influence one element of the European Union to try to rectify or prepare for this challenge, what would you do? So that'll be my very general way of introducing the panel, and I'm wondering how we should begin. Maybe, how would you feel, Ms. Ojuland, ladies first? We begin maybe with you, is that okay? And then we'll continue with the others.
This is, yes, thank you very much. Once again, nice to see you guys in this morning again. Well, and I'm sorry I have to be 12:15 down there because I have another meeting with a colleague from the United States. But nevertheless, one thing I would say, this is the balanced state budget.
If you had a magic wand, that would be what you would do.
Sorry?
If you had a magic wand, that would be what you would do, is to balance the state budget.
Yes. Simply, it's very easy. My motto is that you cannot spend more as you earn. You simply cannot spend more as you earn, and that's this balanced state budget. It's a very logical. In every family, in every person, you cannot spend more, even if you dream to spend more. And I think these times are over for Europe to take big loans. And if I may become political, then I'm a liberal from my political family, and I would say that this socialist dreams just to be nice to the voters, to raise the salaries, etc., it's over. These times are over.
I don't want to let you off so easy. I think it's one thing to say balance the budget, but obviously what that means is also making very difficult decisions. And it also means cutting. And obviously it's hard in the context of this to go into tremendous depth, but where do you see maybe the biggest opportunities where one could actually cut or save? Because that's the biggest debate, and of course where the different parties in the different countries don't agree. Do you see maybe certain components that elevates above others where one could cut or where one could begin to make that very difficult job of balancing the budget?
Yes, of course, it's not that easy, and as a politician, I understand it well that you have to explain it to people, otherwise they come to the streets, as we have seen in the case of Greece. But well, Well, I think that everything is explainable, and I think this is the political part of the job. We politicians simply must tell the truth to the people. And the truth is that we are not able to live in the same ways like our parents used to live in the good times of Belle Époque of 80s or 90s in the European Union. It's finished. But the very practical thing, what I think Europe needs is also to transform the classical way of governance. When we used to have a very big state departments, a lot of public servants, and etc., to change this, and this is very structural and basic change, is just to implement the e-governance system. E-governance, which means that you can make fast the state organization much cheaper, because you don't need that many people in the public sector, and this is very transparent. It's if you use the e-governance system like it's done in my country last 11 years, when you really don't need to go to the local government personally yourself, you don't need to go to the tax department yourself, you simply do it at home in the computer. And it's all in programs, so you don't need tens of people who are checking your documents, because it's all in the system, and this works. It's possible, it's reality, and I mean that this is not sort of wishful thinking. It's about the political decision to do so, and this is also very much against corruption, because if data is in internet, and especially public data, for example, the salaries of the state officials or public servants, starting from the president of the country, ending up with the lowest level of local governors. So it's easy also to follow what is happening in your country. And the people, at least in my country, have get used to this very much, and we like this system. It works, and I would say that this could be one challenges for Europe to get out of the crisis, to make this structural change, not only in practice, but also very much in mentality. We must change.
Glad that you mentioned that, Ms. Ojuland, because I think there we can actually learn from Estonia a lot in terms of, I think Estonia is one of the leaders actually within the EU when it comes to actually e-governance, etc., and whether it's e-voting, taxes, etc., far much more efficient. And I think Estonia is exactly the example that I think maybe we should consider following. If Estonia can do it, why can't the European Union? And maybe just a small related question. I was having a debate yesterday with some of the members of the European Parliament about this very kind of provocative problem with the EU. Where the EU right now is not just Brussels, but it's Brussels and Strasbourg. And if one calculates, the tremendous amount of money that is involved, once a month, basically the whole Parliament moving to Strasbourg for a week, moving back, the travel costs, it was 200 million or billion, I forget the exact amount every year that gets kind of wasted. Apparently that's pressures from France. I know that's kind of a touchy issue, but I was just curious. I mean, is that one opportunity? I mean, could one maybe centralize, let's say electronically on the one hand, but also physically, instead of moving the whole Parliament, every month? What are your views on that?
Well, this of course does not save Europe. I mean, if there will be one location of the Parliament, this expenditure is not enough high, unfortunately. I would say that would save Europe. I'm not against of one seat of the Parliament, but for me is the question why it should be then Brussels, like automatically, why it couldn't be Strasbourg, because. And I have the argument not only because I like Strasbourg personally, but I think that still Strasbourg has a really historical reason to be really the sort of capital of Europe. This is the basic background for the European Union as such, because for what European Union was created. It was created for avoiding any further conflicts and wars. If you look at the history between Germany and France, how much there have been these conflicts. And therefore, Strasbourg is definitely the symbol of the European Union, in my view. And this is, of course, for many people a very emotional question. Of course, we can review the procedures and if we really need to go there every month and so on. But I would say that the idea of Europe is very much laid exactly in Strasbourg and creating the seat of Parliament there. This is the sort of really very symbolic thing. It's what I would say, that we don't need divided, we need united Europe. So I don't want to see that one day this Europe is going to split up. And actually this is a very current challenge again. We are facing tomorrow the very, very important summit, perhaps one of the most important summits in the history of the European Union. We don't know where we will be tomorrow evening, where Europe will be tomorrow evening. So it's a very, very difficult question. And if we really look the crisis inside the Eurozone, the new ideas to set up the new treaties based on Eurozone countries, etc. If you would talk now to the Swedish colleagues, for example, the Danish colleagues, or the others who are not members of this Eurozone club, they are very concerned, I must say, because we don't know really what is going to happen to Europe. And therefore, still, I would not starting to break down these very, very symbolic and symbolistic elements in the existing union, like Strasbourg, for example, is. But I can't be too long.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to now go to the economist on board with Willem Noé, but beforehand, maybe just to give a warm welcome to Dr. Fabrice Serodes. Speaking of France, actually, Fabrice is the former deputy director of ICD Paris, a longtime partner and collaborator with ICD, currently visiting professor at the University of Manchester, although based actually here in Brussels. So very happy to have you with us as well, Fabrice. We'll come to the French perspectives in a moment, but I think given the topic of the lecture, of the panel discussion, it would be very fitting to continue now with Willem Noé. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. First of all, a big thank you for having me on board again. It's always a pleasure for me. This is always this kind of interaction, a very good reality check as well, that there's such a thing outside of Brussels, and to see what people are actually thinking and also thinking about Europe. Now, just on the economic crisis, as an economist, I think there's three things actually necessary. First, for a short term and medium and long term. And you see that happening now on the short term. You need liquidity for the markets. There must be a minimum of confidence that there's going to be enough money around. For instance, banks have stopped lending to each other, which is a very worrying sign, because that also happened in the 2008 crisis. So there must be confidence that there's going to be enough money around. Now, that money is going to be needed to buy some time, almost literally, indeed to balance the state budget, and I completely agree there. The council meeting tomorrow actually is going to discuss precisely stricter rules on an automaticity of the excessive deficit procedure and the Stability and Growth Pact. So you need that, and in a broader context, you also then need restructuring of the economies at a faster pace, because the root of the cause is that economies, especially within the Eurozone, have been growing apart in terms of competitiveness. And that was clearly unsustainable. In many ways, there's nothing unexpected about the crisis. The only thing that was unexpected is when it would come. But that it would come was almost unavoidable. So over the medium and longer term, you need a restructuring of the economies, that they get in proper competitive positions toward each other again. For instance, Germany, labor costs have hardly increased in the last 10 years, whereas Spanish and Greek and Italian labor costs have gone way up, and they have thereby become completely uncompetitive. And of course, they used to have the old system of devaluation, getting your currency down, and then at least for the short term, that would buy you some time. And the idea with the Eurozone was always that this is now ruled out. You have to take what some people think the golden way, meaning the hard and tough way to restructure your economy, rather than buying a little bit more time by just devaluating your currency. So that is now absolutely going to be necessary for the medium term. If that is not going to happen, meaning, for instance, there's going to be plans by governments, by the member states, that actually convince the markets that this is credible, then the short-term extra liquidity is not going to help either. It's just a postponement, and every time the crisis is then going to be worse. You have to address the underlying root causes of the crisis, and finances are just one part of that. Just one final remark. I think it's very interesting. You see this in a political economy context, and you have seen this happening especially since the 70s onward, that every crisis we've had, including economic crisis in Europe, has been pushing toward further integration. This is a very typical phenomenon. And you see that now as well. Everything that's going to be discussed tomorrow at the council meeting is about introducing or strengthening existing mechanisms or introducing new mechanisms for joint cooperation rather than leaving at the state level of state competence. A crisis forces to cooperate, not because it sounds so nice and it sells well, but because of hard-nosed economic fact that countries, to their shock and horror every time with a crisis, discover that they're part of a globalized world and have become completely interdependent. And that the idea in that sense of sovereignty is a beautiful legal fiction, nothing more, nothing less. In economic reality, you are completely interdependent, which is a wonderful dynamics and in fact the core machine on how European integration, modern integration actually works, because that's internal market. You become interdependent, you are thereby forced to cooperate. In the end, that makes a lot of economic sense and brings more gains as losses. But the crisis shows the fault lines where that cooperation has not followed up in terms of economic reality, and you are forced to face that in a crisis, and this crisis is again going to be a very good example of that. So I tend to be hopeful that the EU member states will get out of this. So far, the EU has proven itself to be extraordinarily creative in getting themselves out of black holes. And if you look at the history of the EU, which is a history of one crisis after the other, or parallel crisis, or multiple crises, this one is admittedly a very big one, but I want to be optimistic also because the alternative for the member states would be even more expensive as going on with this. You are sort of doomed to each other. And I think in the end that's a very good thing, because that is what European integration to a large extent is about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Willem. Sebastian, before I move to the three academics on the panel, I'd love to get your perspectives, maybe from civil society, or I'm not sure which hat to put on you. What do you see as the biggest economic challenge facing Europe today?
This is a hard question. I'm not a specialist in the field. I'm not an economist or a politician. The only thing I can speak or say, it's the things that I observe on a local level, I would say. Like I'm living not far from here, and I can see that really simple citizens who don't have a clue about what's happening in the high sphere, knowing that there is some crisis situation, they will start to do some volunteering things, they will try to be together and think about local solutions, you know, and this is, they just try to find little solutions. And I was just thinking, and maybe I was going to ask the question, is it a good solution to push people to just not be, how do you say that, expecting something from the high sphere, you know? Should we really put them in that direction, or should they expect something coming from above? Which is going to be bring a division in a way, but is it really what you want, or, well, that would be my question, you know.
A very important question, and a very important point also in terms of what is the responsibility of European citizens. You know, it's easy to point the finger, it's easy to criticize Brussels, European Commission, this and that, or balance the budget, all of these things. But it's a very important question. What is our responsibility as citizens? Is it enough for me just to worry about myself and my career and my family and my group? Or do I also have to worry about my neighbor? Do I have a responsibility for my neighbor? You were mentioning volunteering, etc. It's a very important question that I think each of the 27 countries, as well as the many many cultures, there's many more than 27 cultures involved, have different experiences there. I mean, in Germany, I've had fascinating experiences volunteering for this Berliner Tafel. That's an organization that provides food for those in need. They take it the day of the expiration date from the supermarket and immediately distribute it to homeless shelters and distribution points in the city. One of the things we do as part of that is called Eins mehr Aktion, where you actually are one more, where you stand in front of a supermarket and ask people, if possible, if they could contribute 1 liter of milk or a piece of bread, etc., towards this cause. And I've had fascinating experiences there. First of all, it's those people who are usually you'd least expect it who are the most generous. Of course, the businessman with the tie and the cell phone just walks right by. But I've had women, for example, come to me saying, with 2 or 3 children together with them, I used to receive from Berliner Tafel, and now I want to give back. I've had other experiences where I had people angry with me. I've had literally, I still remember this one person, maybe in his 50s or 60s, a German person, and was really mad. How dare I ask that he, out of his own money and his own, hard-earned, savings, should be contributing something for, those in need. He says, I pay so much in taxes, every year to the German government. If there's poverty in Germany, it's the politicians' fault. They should deal with this. And he was really mad, that we dare ask that he should actually somehow intervene. And on the one hand, I was frustrated by his anger. On the other hand, I could understand it. For a long time in Germany, the government did take care of you. And the government, you paid a lot in taxes, and they would take care. So I just wanted to mention that as an example. It's a key point that I think we should all ask ourselves, these 4 days too. What is our responsibility? What can we as citizens do to support Brussels, to support the European Union? Whether we're working for NGOs, film directors, politicians, etc. Very important point. So I just wanted to underline that. So thank you very much. Now I'd like to give a chance maybe to the 3 academics, if I can label you as that, on the panel. We had a chance actually already to hear from 2 of them, so maybe I'll first begin with Dr. Fabrice Serodes. If you could also give us your perspectives, whether it's a French perspective or a British perspective, you're wearing many hats at the moment. What do you see as the biggest economic challenge facing Europe today? Fabrice.
Hello everybody, I'm sorry for being late. As far as I'm concerned, I read yesterday in a famous French newspaper called Le Monde an analysis of this crisis, and they were quoting the results of a research made by a Brussels-based think tank called Bruegel. According to them, one of the consequences of the end of the Eurozone as such, will be a loss of wages by something like 40%. So we've got here a situation. According to many, top priority is now to save money as much as we can. I will have quite different vision here. Many analysts, many economists, on the other hand, think that Europe, the European Union as such, is suffering on the opposite from a lack of investment. You mentioned, and you were right in doing this, the connection between Brussels and Strasbourg. Many MEPs here don't like Strasbourg at all just because of these bad connections. But remember, Strasbourg was chosen as such as the seat of the European Parliament as soon as 1957. Nothing was done to improve the railways between Brussels and Strasbourg. We've got no high-speed trains. You've got many of them in Europe, nothing between this. Instead, we've got a very slow moving train that is really boring for many MEPs. Lack of investment. But of course for us, as we work in the field of cultural diplomacy, it's a case also of culture. Maybe more than ever, nowadays culture is considered as a luxury. And the EU doesn't spend any more on cultural diplomacy as such. And I think we should think ahead. And it's very difficult to promote this way of thinking at the moment, but we should also make a pledge in favor of an investment in cultural diplomacy as well. So rather investing than saving will be my last word.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. Dr. Jelen, would you perhaps like to continue? Or?
Well, Mark, you mentioned the word responsibility and accountability also. Well, I think in this case, in this situation, we cannot find a tactical solution for this problem now. We work on another dimension, but anyway, the history tells us that given money means responsibility as well as getting money. So the good banker is always take care about the way he is giving money and the same. It's the side of the same part. So actually the modern economy, the so-called capitalist revolution, Fernand Braudel learned us, means giving money, getting money, making investment, sometimes as the big bankers do, inventing. It means capitalistic economy means inventing money. So it's it's a big responsibility to manage money around and to give money. So the work of the good bankers or of the institution giving money is also to follow the investments and the destination of the monies, also of the management of the monies. So if now some institution did accumulate so huge debt, it's a big contradiction between these two sides of the same scenario. We assist. It's in the economic history. It's always difficult to make some confrontation or some comparison, but we did assist, for instance, in the 80s. To a kind of such problem between the Western banks or states and some Eastern states like Yugoslavia or Poland, for instance. They made a huge amount of public debt. And we know in which way it is, and also in the economic scenario between the Western states and the third world countries in the 70s, in the 80s. So just giving money is not the solution. It's just one side of this. We have to stress this fact, responsibility of giving and having money. Maybe it's...
Thank you very much. Dr. Furfari, I'd be very interested in your reflections.
Thank you. I think that the good thing of Europe is to create benchmark. And not being in our own corner of the world, we see the good thing here and there. Italian espresso coffee is now available everywhere in Europe, and in the south of Italy, where I'm coming from, we have discovered how good is the salmon, something which was not existing in the past. Just two banal examples to see that, yes, the good thing of Europe is to create benchmark. And presently, we are in this difficult situation. We have benchmark. We see that some states, and not only Germany, are much better controlled than others. And we are in this difficult situation where people dreaming since tens and tens of years that they were in a good system, suddenly they realize that they were not in a good system, and they are collapsing. I take the example of Italy. For years, we had an alternation of government, left and right. And both gave the same result. And at the end, we have been obliged to call a former European Commissioner to put some order into that. And the politicians are looking at it, of what he is obliged to do. And he knows what to do. He has to do common sense. And not to promise, like for so many years, politicians have made. This is the problem which we are suffering today. Politicians have made inconsiderate promise for so many years in all sectors of public life. The consequence of that is that we will need much more integration, as you said. The discussion tomorrow is very simple, you know. We know that we need more integration, that Greece, Italy cannot continue in the way they were doing, and they should be more close to other countries' way of doing. But who am going to decide? That's the issue. Are we going to have more federalism? Or are we going to have more intergovernmental? That's the issue. We have to see whom is going to decide what we have to do, because we have to change something. Another things which have happened those last years is the increase of the local powers. I have developed this concept in the European Commission in the field of energy, because I've been convinced that yes, we need to bring big European politics on energy to the local level. And I have created the concept of local and regional agencies. And it's now evolving toward the covenant of mayor. So I am maybe one of the culprits of bringing the energy at local level. Why I say a culprit? Because nowadays there is so much power at local level that they block everything. And particularly, they block infrastructure. You mentioned infrastructure. That's the problem nowadays. When Mr. Prodi was president of the Commission, he have introduced himself in the list of priority projects some major infrastructure project in Italy. Arriving in Italy as Prime Minister, he was against those infrastructure because the party were against it. And why the party were against it? Because local authorities were against it. And we are in this incredible situation where we need infrastructure and a mayor of a city blocked the complete process. That's why Mr. Monti decided to put a ministry for infrastructure. We need to deblock that. And I think that we are suffering of this problem in Europe. Too much power to the local people. Of course, we are going into this direction, but what is the interest of the community? Is it just to defend the interest of the single village? On the contrary, to defend the EU? I think it's a real challenge nowadays.
Thank you very much. I thought that was a helpful way of outlining some of the key issues and challenges facing us. Now I would like to give the floor to you. So this is your panel. Who would like to go first? Bernard.
I'd like to thank all the panelists for their comments and contribution. Mr. Furfari, I'd like to take you to task on a couple of statements that you made. You asked the Assembly here if there were any instances of accidents with fuel rods. And as I understand it, your response was that there haven't been any significant accidents with fuel rods in the last 50 years. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that true?
Sorry?
I just want to understand your statement. Was your statement that there have not been any significant accidents with spent fuel rods in the last 50 years?
Yes.
Well, I think that Fukushima embodies all that's wrong with the nuclear industry. It boggles the imagination, but there were 600,000 spent fuel rods stored at that facility. Outside the different containment facilities, there was between 67 and 83 tons of spent rod material. Now, we all know that several of the containment buildings exploded. And in doing so, they atomized a lot of that material, which was dispersed into the atmosphere. There was seaborne radiation and contamination, and there was airborne radiation and contamination, and there was an exclusion zone of over 50 kilometers. It was a catastrophic event of which we still do not know the consequences of. A study was conducted before the Fukushima facility was even constructed, and it warned that that site was not suitable because it was subject to catastrophic events like hurricanes and earthquakes and so on, and warned that if such happened, that would endanger the physical integrity of the building. I don't want to give a lesson here, but it's not factual that we haven't had catastrophic accidents with spent fuel rods. And the situation is so dire at Fukushima, and not to mention the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and all the other things that are happening that have a serious impact on humanity around the entire planet. I'm kind of confused why there is no discussion, why you didn't even mention Fukushima, why that is not factored into your presentation when you make these statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Darnell. Before you respond, maybe would it be possible if we collect a number of questions? Because I'm sure there are many, many people with questions, and I want to make sure we have a chance. We have 10 minutes for the panel, so I'd suggest let's take a few, and then we'll give it back to the panel, and then we can each respond to those questions that we feel are most relevant.
I wanted to ask you, in the light of the summit that is starting tonight here in Brussels, some of you have argued that crisis has brought about integration. There's a lot of signs that this particular summit and this particular crisis may actually bring fragmentation. David Cameron was against a EU treaty even before France and Germany came up with any sort of joint letter. And there's been countries that have always been against new treaties and significant changes. Right now, there's a talk about actually going ahead with a EU 17 proposal for the countries that are in the euro and leaving 10 countries separate from that. Do you think that this is the crisis that may actually start to bring fragmentation to the European Union? Thank you.
My name is Ursula Galińska, and I'm a Polish participant here. I would like to ask about the financial sector. If you could please shed your light, if we are going to leave the sector in this neoliberal paradigm of deregulation and invisible market hand, or is there going to be a change in this? Thank you.
Dr. Furfari.
You know, each time that you speak about energy, there are people which are against you. So I'm not surprised about your statement. I noted immediately that you were not happy of what I was doing and saying. It's the same if you talk about waste. If you talk about urban waste and what to do with waste, you have exactly the same reaction as you have with nuclear. I didn't mention Fukushima because I cannot mention everything. Fukushima has been an accident of the nature. There was 29,000 people died because of an earthquake and a tsunami. As far as I know, there is not yet one died because of the nuclear. So nature is much more worse than nuclear energy. Second thing, you mentioned an explosion. Which type of explosion it was? It was a hydrogen explosion. Hydrogen explosion, nothing to do with nuclear. We know since years that the zirconium tubes where there is the uranium are reacting with steam at high temperature. And the reaction produces hydrogen. Most of the nuclear power plants in the world, and all in Europe, are equipped with catalytic recombination. That means that if you know that there is some hydrogen, this hydrogen will be absorbed to avoid any explosion. The Japanese company refused to install that because the plant was pretty old and should have been closed slowly. It was one of the oldest plants in the world. So comparing that with the standard of the plant that we have in Europe is not fair. Third thing, you mentioned numbers. It's easy to mention numbers. The people who escaped from Japan, because of the number you mentioned, took much more radiation in the plane to escape from Japan than the people who have remained there. So I think that we should be a little bit more serious when we talk about nuclear energy. It's a complex issue, and it's not correct to play fears with that.
No taxation without representation. This could be the slogan for a new period for European architectural institutional framework. And I think now we are just in this situation because, well, responsibility, accountability, we have different level, multi-level political representative situation. And this could be, this is a problem to solve in any way. We have either to continue on the federalistic way or to push integration because I think the economic history tells us that the integration is not obvious way. Sometimes the crisis prospected fragmentation. This happened, for instance, just to have an historical example, in the late medieval, late Renaissance Italy. A lot of small states, flourishing, prosperous country, but the crisis put not together, but was pushed against each other, these countries. But this is just one of the different scenarios. Actually, I'm living in a borderland, so this gives me the privilege to see already some cases. For instance, the recent history of Yugoslavia was just a history of accumulating debt, of spending money, not true money, and without responsibility. And this happened mainly in many other cases of state bankruptcy in the late, I mean Argentina, I mean we could make a lot of other countries which had such a situation. So the only way I think is to be aware, to be conscious, to stress this point. No democracy, no organization, no efficiency without responsibility, accountability, and discipline. Could you say discipline? Self-discipline, so no taxation without representation. This could be the slogan for a new epoch in Europe.
Willem?
Yeah, thanks for the interesting questions on fragmentation. Of course, every crisis is also a crisis because there's opposites and very strong opposition position. If everybody would agree in the first place, there would have been no crisis and there would be no crisis. So that is just the normal procedure, so to speak. Now, it's true that theoretically you cannot exclude that a fragmentation could take place. So far, European integration history, also from a political perspective, has been that every time they found, at least for a moment, workable political compromises. And I think one of the underlying reasons for that is that there might be political fragmentation, but the economic reality is everything but fragmented. A country can declare itself sovereign and independent, and it's a bit like Shakespeare. I can declare myself king of the universe and go live in a shell, but I will have bad dreams. This is the same thing. The economic reality, the globalization reality, forces you to such compromises. Now, I think to some extent the UK position is also part for a home audience that still fails to grasp that. Don't forget, the UK was actually one of the founding members of EFTA, European Free Trade Association, and one of the first members that left EFTA in order to become part of the EU, which always went for a much deeper form of integration. And they could have left the EU at any time, actually. It's the prerogative of any state to leave the EU when they want to, but they never did. So surely, my argument would be, surely there is something about economic integration that is offered through the EU that also offers the UK benefits in the end. So, like I said, theoretically it's possible to have a fragmentation. But chances are that they will find a solution that at least covers things over in the meantime, allowing more time to go with structural changes in order to that reflect the economic reality that they can't get away from, no matter what they say, so to speak. On the neoliberal paradigm of the financial sector, it's actually, first of all, I completely understand and sympathize with a lot of the arguments against the financial sector. As a person, as a citizen, as an economist, I would have to take a slightly more nuanced position maybe, that first of all, the financial sector worldwide is actually one of the most regulated sectors in the world. This already started with the big financial crisis in 1928, 1929. If you look at the banking rules that are set by internationally, they cover tens of thousands of pages, and it always has been a sort of arms race, so to speak, between the financial sectors and the rule system. The rules are made and then you try to avoid that. And the banking system has been quite good at that, of course. But it is an extremely regulated sector. Now, theoretically, of course, the purpose of the financial sector is to allow investment to take place that otherwise could not take place through the spreading of risks. That is theoretically what the financial sector should be doing. Now, of course, in practice then, what happens is that you now have a case almost of the tail wagging the dog, that the real sector becomes so dependent on the financial sector that whatever happens, something incomprehensible for most people in the financial sector, then has a huge impact on the real sector. And a lot of these crises happen that way. So I think, and obviously that needs to be addressed. And again, part of the financial sector integration push that is happening now in rules making is again, will be a result of this financial sector, the crisis that started in the financial sector. So this neoliberal paradigm has to be very, very strongly qualified. It isn't really, but the financial sector so far has been very good in coming up with new instruments that in fact do not spread risk, because that was theoretically the case, but they actually increased systemic risk. Part of that procedure was by making it so completely intransparent that nobody, and I would say literally nobody in the market, be it in the banks themselves or the regulators or governments, and certainly not the consumers, would be able to actually understand the risk that they were taking or creating by creating such incredibly complex financial instruments. And I would say that has been done deliberately, because if you don't understand it, it's maybe easier to push on the market. If you know that the others are not going to understand it, you already don't understand it either, and you're a specialist. So that has to be addressed now very clearly. In the end, the financial sector growth is now stalling. Like globalization, it's not an irreversible process. It's going very slow. It will at some stage start taking off again. But it was part of the financial sector crisis was also everybody's guilty in this story of who's responsible. It was the banks, but it was also the regulators, it was also the governments, to some extent also the profession of economists, who were mostly very silent on that. And I don't quite understand why that happened. But we all have to look at this, because there's a lesson in it for all of us. So we can't get away from a moral and ethical responsibility, if nothing else, to check whatever happens now in the financial sector. By the way, and I have to be very realistic at this, it is unavoidable that there will be new crises again. It is inherent in the capitalist system. It's always like that. This is not necessarily a bad thing, by the way, because it pushes usually again toward further integration. Of course, it's a bad thing for if you happen to be the victim of and you lose your savings money, etc. The rules now try to at least prevent some of the worst crises to happening, or if they happen, that you get out of them as soon as possible with a minimum of pain. That is what you try, but I can guarantee you, in a way I can guarantee you we will get out of this crisis. I can equally guarantee you we will have new crises. It's part of the procedure and of the system. Sorry I can't be more positive in that sense, but
Thank you. Some optimism combined with also some pessimism, but the realistic approach is, I think, very important. Please, Sebastien, if you could continue, and then after that, Fabrice, if I could give you the task of also giving some concluding remarks for the panel on behalf of ICD would be great. But first, Sebastien.
No, I just wanted to come back about the energy field, not to point who's right or wrong, but what I heard is that after Fukushima, in fact, the German government decided to leave their power plants, and I suppose energy is a big, I mean, economically speaking, it's you really have to take that into consideration. So this kind of decision from the German government, what does it bring, economically speaking, into Europe? Does that mean that do you have an answer with that? How do you manage between countries to make such decisions? Does it have to come from the European side, or does it have to come from the national government?
It's difficult maybe to conclude, especially for everybody here. Just two final remarks maybe on this. Fragmentation, a very interesting issue anyway. I would say fragmentation has already started. As mentioned, EU has lived now a couple of crises. The worst maybe now in retrospect will be the one lived in the 2000, let's say around 2005. This process of fragmentation is not only national, it's also regional one, and especially here in Belgium. So as a matter of fact, we've got to notice that this fragmentation is going on. There is a process going on. What's striking is that many people want it, support it. So for us, as a think tank, it's really challenging. During a long time, it was said it's due to education. People don't speak many languages, dependent on national education. I don't think so anymore. It's not anymore the case in educational systems in Europe. We've got to make some progress, but, well, this is not the main issue. I guess the main issue is more due to media and newspaper coverage. We really depend on them for our information, news on the EU, and they remain really national and even over-local. And this could be a reason and an explanation why we've got so many difficulties to stop this process of fragmentation. And you need also a political will to do this, a political mandate. And I don't think that our politicians now in Europe have this mandate. Concerning regulation, it's interesting to notice that it is often said that the Anglo-Saxons don't want regulation at all. But what we see today is no regulation, not even a Robin Hood tax in the financial sphere. That's true, but over-regulation for people. In the European Union, we've got a lot of rules for people, migrants, and so on. So it's not really a Latin idea or prejudice to really set rules, and I guess it will be difficult to do this unless we invest a lot in knowledge, in our capacities in Europe, and we try to depend less and less on the financial sector.
Well, thank you very much, Fabrice, also for offering some words of conclusion for the panel. And no, I thought we all benefited from this greatly. It was good to also not only focus on the cultural aspects in the context of a cultural diplomacy conference, but also the economic aspects. So I'd ask you all to please join me in expressing our gratitude for the entire panel. Thank you.